happening, everyone? This is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box Podcast. That's right. Today we're going to be talking about Africa because today's Tuesday. But here's just one thing to know. We've already gone through all lessons in Africa. So what we're going to do is a little review. And I got our top 10 things to remember about Africa. Now, I did leave out some of the other important things. These are just like very interesting things. We're going to go through them, but it's not everything. So again, go through the curriculum, check that out, figure out what things you want to focus on, because you don't have to go through the whole thing. It's 400 pages. It is long. I understand that. But what I do want you to do is go through and find the specifics that you want to learn about and learn those. And then we'll fill in the gaps. So it's not something that you have to read every single page and memorize every single page, everything that's going on there. No, the main thing is actually to enjoy what you're reading, because there are some fascinating things there. I mean, super fascinating, which we're going to go over today. Okay, so let's go through a few of them. Now, first, I'm going to bring up my map. And again, if you are on our YouTube channel, you don't have to worry about this. Or sorry, if you're not on our YouTube channel, you don't have to worry about this. It's just a map of the world. So that's all we're going to be showing today. There are no images. You don't have to worry about it. You can listen to our podcast and enjoy. Please subscribe as well, because we need to get as many ratings and reviews and subscriptions as possible to keep going. Okay, so in here, we're going to be talking about, this is us in the United States. Go due east and south, and you'll find yourself in Africa, of course. So you go into Africa. There's a lot of things to know about Africa. We got the bare surface of all that information, because this is like 20,000 years worth of information all in 1 month. Good luck. It'd take you a lifetime. But because we don't have a lifetime, I'm going to give you the most interesting and most important things to understand during this time. Okay, so first off, the rock art. So Africa has a wealth of rock art all throughout the continent. Some examples of some of the oldest periods of time. So Algeria has some great ones. You can look them up online. Thousands of rock paintings. So these are great. This is what you need to be able to understand, is that the people lived here and drew their art basically describing how they lived. Now, later on, we'd get hieroglyphics from the Egyptians. We'd get writings from the Egyptians and from others as well. And it would go from there. But back then, they didn't have writing. They didn't know an alphabet, whether it be in any language. And so they had to do with what they knew, which was taking something that was colored, some sort of paint, and painting it up on a rock. And that's what they could do. So those stretch back to about 10,000 years ago. Now, again, plus or minus, even carbon dating is not 100% accurate. Okay, so these artworks provided insight into their culture of early African societies. Let's jump up a little bit further. Okay, so now it's going to be like 10,000 BC to 4,000 BC. If you look at a map of Africa, you're going to see in the top portion of Africa, it's all desert. But it didn't used to be all desert, according to archaeologists and those assumptions. It's theory. But the theory is called the Green Sahara period. Again, 10,000 BC to about 4,000 BC. This is when this huge desert that is the Sahara Desert, on the north part, which encompasses probably about a fifth of the landmass of all of Africa. So this region was possibly green. And it had animals all over the place. It had oases. It had trees. It had greenery. It had shrubs. It had anything you want. Big lakes of water. Now it's sand and dirt and rock and mountains without the greenery. That's why if you look at a map, especially if it's the Earth map, like where you can see where the forests are, where the deserts are, it's like all desert. So puts every other desert to shame. Okay, so that's one more thing to know about. The Nok culture, civilization is the next one to think about. The Noks were over here in Western Africa near Nigeria. and they spread out from there. They were one of the first societies outside of Africa, sub-Africa. One of the first complex societies. And we actually talk about it. During the Neolithic era, there were groups that would come together and settle down. So they would actually create their own settlements in these areas. The Knox were one of the earliest ones. Also at the same time were the Bantu. So the Bantu were a tribe, it was a language, but most likely came from a single tribe, and they were able to talk to each other through a language called Bantu. Now, this early language that they spoke, from there they actually spread all over central and near southern Africa. And this language spread throughout this place, spread throughout all this area. So it basically started up in Nigeria, in this area, Cameroon and Nigeria, and spread south and west, and east, and then a little bit west as well. But you had the Knox, and you had, which was a civilization, and you had the Bantu. Now there was probably some intermingling in there too. So, okay, going forward in that Bantu migration, you also had a group called the San people, or the, and I'm really going to butcher this one, the Khoikhoi, Khoikohoi, Khoikhoi people. Okay, so you have the San, who are the Bushmen, and the Khoikhoi people. Some of the oldest indigenous populations, some of them still standing today, which means there's still bush people out there in Africa. Not as prevalent as they used to be, but are still trying to make their home in their civilization within the modern day world, living on their own. Now, again, most of them have merged in with Western and Eastern civilizations, but it is what it is. Okay, next thing to know. Okay, so that was the San people. Go up north near Morocco and also near Spain, near the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, that peninsula that comes out of Europe. It comes through what is called the Straits. Straits of Gibraltar, which basically do not connect Europe and Africa, or I should say Spain and Morocco, but it's very close, so you can actually see across, as far as I know. And in that area, you had a group called the Carthaginians. Yeah, one of those. Okay, but they were actually mostly up here in northern Africa, but they spread throughout here. And then, as you know, when the Romans came, they actually came up through Spain, in through France, and into Italy, which is why there was the Punic Wars. And we're going to go over that when we go over Rome. Okay, so next off, who's next? Now, number 7, the Swahili city-states. Down here, on the east side of Africa, you have Somalia, you have Kenya, you have Tanzania, and you have Mozambique. So those 4 countries basically make up what was the Swahili city-state. And these are a group of tribes, a group of communities that were brought together, and they created this flourishing trade market all throughout, not just the east side of Africa, but Middle East, India, the rest of Asia, mostly around the Indonesian islands and such. And so this trade network was so massive. And what was interesting is the fact that the Islamic traders that came down I can't say that they actually taught them about bondage and about slavery, but they brought slave trade into that area, and they went out into this interior of Africa, gathered people, brought them back to the coast, and sold them over the markets into Middle East, India, Asia, other parts of Asia, and all throughout the eastern side of Africa. But here's interesting. So this was actually part of the Trans-Saharan trade network, though it was not Saharan, it was below Sahara, but it was actually attached to all these other trade networks all throughout northern and western Africa. And what that did, so remember when there was a trade route before Islamic traders came in, but at the point of Islamic traders, around 600 to 700 AD, you had Muhammad, who was born, started up a following, which became, they become Muslims, and the religion was Islam. Now, at some point, they come into Cairo, I think it's around 800 AD, and they take over Cairo in Egypt, totally through war, and they continue to spread. Now, what happens if you are in the African trade and the Islamic traders and Muslims have taken over Egypt? Well, you cannot get through unless you have their blessing. So, whether it was conversion, whether it was getting on their good sides, France had their good side because of actually one of the wars that was going on in Europe, and they actually sided with a caliphate. Now, this is years afterwards. But at this point, if you wanted to get into Africa, you had to go through either ship or through the Islamic state of Egypt at the time, because it was taken over. Okay, so that being said, and that being said about the Islamic traders, they brought it over to Mali and such around 1000 AD. They brought slavery into Mali, and Mali wanted it because they had gold to mine, they had salt to produce, they had ivory to hunt down. So, in all these things, they actually welcomed slavery and put the slaves to work, mostly within their area and the outlying areas. Now, but here's the interesting thing. You come over to Africa and you go down to the the east side, you have the Swahili state, very pro-labor, pro-slavery. But then you come down into what is called, remember the name, Mapungubwe, which is South Africa. And this was a group down here, one of the earliest states in southern Africa, in the southern province of Africa. And they traded gold and ivory. It was their mainstay. Now, they traded with the Swahili city-states, but they would not trade slaves. Very interesting. There is no evidence that they actually traded slaves. Now, 25 years later, it's said that the Mapungubwe people actually helped establish the Great Zimbabwe. And that was a province, that was a city or civilization in Zimbabwe. Now, in this civilization, it flourished. It was one of the most successful in the South. But here's the thing. The next thing that happened would change everything. But before I get there, remember what's happening over here near Mali and such on the west side. So you had the Ghana Empire, very African religion, culture, and everything. All of a sudden, the Muslims, the Islamic traders came in, started trading, and started gaining influence in that area. So that's when the Mali Empire took over, and they started trading. Who was one of the prime kings of Mali? The richest man in the world, more than Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and maybe a few other billionaires, all put into one. This was Mansa Musa. He's the one that traveled on his Hajj to Mecca from Mali. So Mali through Egypt down to Mecca. Now, interesting enough, on his trip, he distributed 24,000 pounds of gold, and totally tanked the Egyptian market, totally tanked Ethiopia, Nubia, which is over here in like Sudan and such. Going further down south, the Swahili state now, that actually stayed steady. Why? Because they traded in slaves. But what happened down here in Great Zimbabwe? Crushed, destroyed, dismantled. They left because they did not accept slavery as a trade. Now the Mapungubwe, they were actually, as far as I understand, lasted, wait a second. They had dissolved and become parts of other tribes around 1200 AD. So they were already gone by the time Manus Musa come in. But I know that some other of these economies were actually destroyed because of what happened to the gold market. Because the Great Zimbabwe actually traded in gold and ivory. Those were the two main exports. So what happens if gold is worthless, near worthless, then all you have is ivory. Where does ivory come from? It comes from animals. What happens when you run out of animals because you're hunting them too much? Gone. And so the whole civilization crashed. So, that being said, I got one other thing for you. Okay, now this is not part of the top 10. This is just one thing that we talked about last week. This is the introduction of Christianity and Judaism into Africa, and then the Muslim influence afterwards. So what happened was, again, around 0 AD, you had the Christians start to develop in Israel, and then they spread. It's said that Mark came down to Egypt and started teaching as a missionary. So they started teaching in Egypt, came through Sudan, Ethiopia. Whole civilizations became Christian civilizations in Africa. Now, what happened? Okay, so there are actually, let me also say that there are Jewish communities as well in here that existed back before Ethiopia and such. But, which actually makes sense if anybody stayed behind when Egypt had Africans, had Jewish slavery, if you believe in the Bible. And if you don't, go to our Egypt curriculum, you're going to see the debate between whether there's Hebrews in Egypt or not. It's quite an interesting fascination. And we do not tell you what to think. We tell you how to think. We teach you how to think. Okay, so you had Christianity coming through. Now what happened 600 AD again? You had the rise of Islam with the birth of Muhammad and such, and then it spread and came into Africa, and it took over the west side of Africa, and slavery was prevalent there. It also came down to the east side of Africa. Again, slavery, very prevalent. Ethiopia, it did have slavery, but that's where Christianity stayed fairly strong for a long time, and then Islam came in, and it was more of mixed at that point. So you have a lot of things that are going on in Africa. They were not a passive, they were not a weak civilization. No, they were the cradle, according to history, they're the cradle of all existence. And if they are, awesome. If they're not, awesome. It doesn't matter to us. We learn from the lessons that we are given. And so some of the things that we can learn from here, I'm going to leave up to you. If you want help with those lessons, go into the curriculum. It actually has life lessons that you can learn at every single unit. So you can go through and see what kind of lessons you can learn from each of those stories and each of those tales. Now, because this week is actually going to be cut short, because we're done with Africa, I'm going to let you guys catch up, because most likely you needed some time to read and go back and find some more units. So go back, enjoy it, have fun, and we'll talk to you next week as we go into Egypt. Now this is where Africa really gets interesting. Thanks so much for joining us. We will catch you next time. Take care and have a great day. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow actually. Take care. Bye.